Welcome to another episode of New Hampshire Citizens for Progress. We're going to be taking a look at money and politics again. And we've got a guest here to introduce us to that.
Hi, Richard. How are you?
I'm pretty good today. How are we doing?
I'm excellent. My name is Brian Beal, and I am Deputy Director of Open Democracy Action, which is a nonpartisan group based out of Concord. And we've been active doing money and politics, campaign finance reform stuff for about 20-some years now. We work a little bit on the national scene, but mostly we work on state stuff. What's going on with money and politics in the state? And it's kind of surprising that to a lot of people in New Hampshire that, they think of money and politics issues being a national issue. We got our own problems right here in New Hampshire.
Yeah, I was reading some of the stuff you gave me to look at on this LLC Loophole. I mean, they're putting money into that we don't know about. What's going on with this?
So, Richard, you know that scene in the Ghostbusters movie where they're completely covered with slime?
Oh, yeah.
That is where we're going today. We are going to talk about some of the slimy practices of something called the LLC Loophole. And it will surprise listeners and viewers as to how that could possibly happen in New Hampshire, where we value integrity in our election system.
So you got a little bit of history on that. It's not like this is just the first time this has happened here in the state.
That's right. Well, I think before we get into the history of the corruption end of this, we should talk about what an LLC is. And you have some background in business.
Yeah, it's basically, if you don't understand, when you do a business and you want insurance and to protect yourself from liability, you got to become a corporation or an LLC, which is a limited partnership. Because if you're owner run, and something goes wrong, you could be sued and lose all your personal property. So this way here, when you set up a business, the business gets sued, you don't, you're separate. And an LLC is just a way to do that. And it's just a word for another type of corporation, a limited liability corporation, which
Right.
What it is right in the words.
So by itself, it's not a bad thing, right? We need corporations to be able to run our economy and to, protect our personal property. Makes sense, right? Where it gets a little dicey is when these are used to amplify the voices of a very few rich people or wealthy corporations over the voices of the voters. And so this started in New Hampshire in 1999 were the first ones that we saw. So in New Hampshire, if you are running for any office, the most that I can give you is $7,000. So Richard, I'm glad to hear that you've declared to run for, I'm kidding, running for governor of the state of New Hampshire. And I like you, Rick. So I'm going to give you, from my personal checkbook, I'm going to give you $7,000. Here you go, Rick.
Oh, thank you.
All right. So I like you so much that I would like to give you more money.
But how are you going to do that?
That nasty limitation that we have in the state about how much money I can give you gets in the way of all kinds of good things that we could do together. So I have these companies, and if my company gives you money, they are, that corporations are people, right?
Well, Citizens United ruled that, didn't they?
Yeah, right.
They have the same rights, except they're people by money.
So, I might be, let's say, a real estate developer, and I have because I want to protect my properties that I own, the different office buildings and different properties, I might have created a limited liability corporation for each of my properties. So I might have 10, 15 different ones. And I did that because LLCs are really easy to create, because I can go to LegalZoom or I can go to my lawyer and I can have I can pay $50 and I can get an LLC created. So that's a pretty cool thing, right? It makes it real easy.
Well, I might have different partners, and I want to keep it as a separate profit center, and it keeps a way of keeping each property separate, or each investment separate and functioning on its own. So it actually makes a lot of sense.
So even though I'm behind all of these different LLCs and corporations, I can use each one of those LLCs to give you $7,000.
Each one. And you're saying, I got 11. That's almost $100,000 there.
So let me tell you, let's get out of fairy tale land here, and we'll tell you about the financial filings of the candidates for the governor.
Well, before we get there,
Yeah?
wouldn't someone know that I was the person that you were giving all that money to?
Well, you have to be pretty good at digging to find that out. All right, so if you're not so clever, you can have all of those LLCs sent to your address and the same address of your personal, either your home or the main corporation. Or if you're really clever, you can use what they do for shell corporations. You know what shell corporations are,
Yeah,
right?
they usually just have a post office box address where that's where all the
Exactly.
mail goes.
So it's either a post office box, or maybe my accountant has it down in Massachusetts, or maybe it's offshore. Maybe it's somewhere else,
So
some other
basically,
state.
It's really, it can be from not that difficult to be extremely hard to identify these
Right.
things.
If they're registered as a New Hampshire corporation or LLC, I can look them up in the Secretary of State's. There are online tools that we can look things up, and we can sometimes get information on the people who own the LLCs, but very often we can't. And
that
so you are completely anonymous.
Yeah, I mean, Delaware, D.C., used to be like the business capital of everybody, incorporated or LLCs, whatever the business.
Yep.
It was there because of tax purposes.
Exactly.
So it didn't have to be in New Hampshire.
So there are two reasons then that people use these LLCs. One is so I can give you more money, right, than the $7,000 limit that I technically have. But also, you just you just mentioned this, where if I don't want other people to know that I gave you this money, I can hide that behind a corporation. And if you're diligent about it, no one will ever know.
Okay, well, let's pick it up where we left off, bringing it to the real world. What's actually going on? What do we know?
So just last Thursday, in the first week of December, there was a filing that was due from candidates, not just for governor, but for other offices, statewide offices in New Hampshire. And they have to tell the Secretary of State from whom they've received money. And this is a long list of people. And depending on what time, where it is in the election cycle, it can be, 50 people. But in some cases, they can be 30, 40, 50, 60 pages long in 8-point type of all the people who made donations. You gave the governor $5, you have to be listed on this form. If you gave the governor $7,000, you're listed right there as well. So these reports, they get still, after all these years, you can file them electronically with the Secretary of State, but it's optional. So I had to download and print 80 pages of more than that, because I looked at 3 different candidates, and it's all in teeny tiny type. I'm surprised I'm not blind today, seriously. So what we found out was that beginning with Dan Feltus, who's a Democratic candidate for governor. There's also a second Democratic candidate for governor, Andrew Volinsky. Andrew Volinsky didn't take any LLC money. There's none on his report. Dan Feltus, I think there were 5 or 6 of them for the grand total of $5,537.90. Okay? The biggest donation in Dan Feltus's report was $2,200 from one LLC. And this is just LLCs. This is not corporations,
So-
and it's not political action committees.
All of those together don't exceed $7,000, and even if we take that amount by 6, it seems like the companies giving them to them were legitimate companies, not trying to go through to hide this.
Right, and these were all of the ones for Feltus were all one donation organizations. So where it gets interesting is when, and this is not just for this election cycle, but this has been going on since, as I said earlier, 1999, where these LLCs started to get used to funnel money into campaigns. So this latest cycle has Governor Chris Sununu receiving, there were 36 donations from LLCs, and just as the same with Dan Feltus, there were some of them that were totally legit. There were one-off donations of varying amounts. But where it gets really interesting is there were 22 LLCs that were used by only six entities that were able to funnel $147,250 into the governor's campaign coffers. So basically, 6 people just donated $150,000.
Now, you identified that by the address that they used?
Combination of things. Good question. So the first thing we did is we looked at where the billing, they have to tell what their address is for those LLCs. And the first one was for the Brady Sullivan Corporation, and we were able to look at where Brady Sullivan's main billing office was, and those LLCs were the 670 LLC, the Lofts 34 LLC, the 17 Elm Street LLC, the Fitz Street LLC, and the 9 Commercial Street, all accounting for $33,000 from one corporate entity. There's another one that's interesting that used a combination of things. So there's a developer over in, I think he lives in Portsmouth or Newcastle, but his offices are here in Manchester. This is Mark Stebbins and his wife, and they each gave their $7,000. That's cool, right? We're able to give their up to $7,000. But then a hotel LLC that he is associated with gave another $7,000. And a corporation that he owns, which is an architectural firm, gave another $7,000. So now he's got $28,000 of donation into the governor. Now, why does a company do that, right? They want to give that more money, and perhaps they want to be hidden, perhaps they don't. But I'm going to want something for that money, don't you think? I'm not just giving it to you, Richard, because you're a nice guy. Even though you're a nice guy, there are reasons that I'm giving that to you. Let's say my development is intruding into a wetland zone, and I need your help, Governor, to help us navigate the state bureaucracy. Now, do you think if I'm Brian Beal and I'm just, giving you a $100 donation, do you think I'm going to have the same access to you, Governor Maynard?
Yeah, I can understand your concern about all those funds coming together, but don't we need a way to identify this? Is there a way to identify this better so that, there could be, you said 6 people, 147,000. Well, that's a lot through the 6 corporations. How many of
That's
them
in
are
6 months, by the
yeah,
way.
how many are the same 2 people? I mean, you only can divide 6 up so many times when it starts being the same person again and again and again. I mean, that's 6 companies given to you with a mixture of different people doesn't sound unfair. So do we have a way of being able to tell that, or
Well,
is that the problem?
Wouldn't it be nice if we could do that? But some of these, because they're designed as shell corporations, you have to go through a lot of layers to be able to identify, and some of them you may never be able to identify who is behind it. We made an attempt this past year to pass SB 156, which was a Senate bill that it didn't say that you couldn't give the money, but it did say that we needed to know who was behind the LLC. I think that's what you're driving at, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's such a thing as transparency. If we have the ability to know, I mean, if it's the same 2, then it shouldn't be done that way. Okay, because if it's the same 2 people out of the 6 keep giving $7,000, they should only be able to do it once.
You would think.
Yeah, I mean, that would be fair, and we should be able to identify that. I mean, if it was this guy and someone else, and it was, that company giving that would be a different thing. But the fact that we know prevents, or I think, the fact that we know where the money's coming from, it would prevent well, let me look the other way, and why don't you, I'll take care of that later.
Well, it gives us an opportunity to have a program like this that says, hey, there are people that are trying to buy influence here in the election. So there are ways that we can do it. I'll tell you a bit more about another bill that we've got coming up in our next segment.
Then you had a series of corrupt legislators who were being bribed by businessmen to get a seat in the Senate. So one senator would be called the coal senator, another guy would be the oil senator, another guy was the beef senator.
We are actually overdue for a constitutional amendment in this country. Americans regularly need to pass constitutional amendments in order to renew and refresh, if you will, how we secure that promise of liberty and equality for all Americans.
Yeah, we left off at, you were going to tell us some of the legislation you've been working on.
Right. So we talked about SB 156, which got vetoed by the governor. This was to try and close that LLC loophole that we've been talking about. And so without that, and what that would have done is make people disclose who they were, and how much of the share of that LLC that they have. The other thing, and this is coming up in 2020, is what's called a corporate ban bill. Now, it's not as complete as it might sound. The corporate ban bill will actually do what the LLC loophole bill was trying to do, but also would do it for corporations as well. So it would disallow a corporation or corporate entity from making a donation directly to you, Governor Maynard. Okay? They would have to do that into a political action committee, which, if you ask me, isn't all that much better. At least with the political action committee, the candidate may or may not know where that money is coming from. But be that as it may, that's what we have to deal with, because the Supreme Court says the corporation has to be able to give you money somehow, right? So
That's the Citizens United decision?
that's Citizen United and McCutcheon, the McCutcheon decision, the combination of those two things. But what we really like to see is not have to deal with that stuff at all. And because those are Band-Aids. Those are my executive director, Olivia Zink, called it whack-a-mole. Is that when we whack the mole over here, the money pops up in another place. What we'd really like to see is we'd like to see publicly funded elections. Now, we've done that on a national level. Remember the little checkbox on your 1040 form that says, I want to donate to the presidential reelection campaign. That's one way of doing it. Nobody uses that anymore because the amounts weren't high enough for the candidates, is what the response was. But that was a matching system. You as a candidate had to raise a certain amount of money, then the federal money would kick in, or public money would kick in, and then you could run your campaign. The last person to take that was, I've forgotten the last person who took that, but Obama was the one that broke it, that stopped taking that money. And then there's another system that we've been advocating for here in New Hampshire, which is called voter dollars. And we're doing this for the governor's race, the executive council race, to start out with, to see if we can make this work. They do this system in Maine. It's a little bit different in Maine because they do more of a matching system. This is a voter dollar system where the candidate has to go out and raise a certain number of small donations, and then when they reach a certain threshold, then they get voter dollars. These are vouchers, essentially, that get handed by the voters directly to the candidate of their choice who has met that qualification. So we're sorting that out. There's a study committee that's coming up in 2020. It's going to be sorting out some of how that's going to get paid for and how that system is going to work. But that ultimately would solve a lot of these problems.
So Seattle also did a system like that.
Exactly right.
So do we have a couple places experience? Well, they're not going to have to reinvent the wheel. They'll be able to look at how these things are working in other places.
Exactly. There are over a dozen places around the country that have done this in varying flavors. New York City was one that just passed very recently. So there are programs available. Arizona is doing some good things. Some of the systems are, like Massachusetts has one, but then they failed to fund it. And so it's essentially dead because it doesn't have the state funding. But the law is still on the books there.
I think you wanted to cover really the important, we covered the possibility of it. Mm-hmm. We do have some of the data from this current election that there was 22 LLCs controlled by 6 people that donated over $147,000.
That's right.
And no matter how you break up 6 people, it just doesn't equal $7,000 apiece to get to that point. I mean, 6 times 7, that's 40. Well, yeah, it doesn't work. 42, no, it doesn't work. So this wasn't the first time it happened. I mean, we have the king of getting that money that actually kind of focused the attention here. Can you tell us about that?
Well, we talked about it starting in '99, but the king really of the LLC loophole has been former Manchester mayor and gubernatorial candidate Ted Gatz's, and in the primary, just the primary, he raised over $260,000 through LLCs. And I might add, it was the usual suspects. We mentioned Brady Sullivan. We mentioned this gentleman, Mark Stebbins. So there were a couple of other developers involved in this as well. So, this is not the first time. This is not the first rodeo for these folks. They've been trying to use this system to get money in to candidates for a while.
That don't equal to the $7,000 or less by an LLC are tending to be developers. Would that be a fair statement?
Yeah, we have restaurateurs that also, and often the restaurateurs are doing both. I'm starting a new restaurant, so I'm building this, or I'm building a strip center around the restaurant that I'm putting in. So there's a gentleman who, from the Tuscan Brands, I think he was the one that bought the property from the old racetrack in Salem. And he's got 5 LLCs that he's been using to give money as well. And that was one of the ones that we had difficulty tracking down because it appeared that they were being held in Massachusetts. And they were Massachusetts companies that were giving money to New Hampshire's election, which in itself is not that uncommon. We had one, you might remember the Dunkin' Donut hole loophole. Did you hear about this a couple years ago? There's a Dunkin' Donuts franchisee in Massachusetts with dozens of LLCs, one for each of his locations. And he was doing this and has done this for, I think, 3 different gubernatorial candidates in New Hampshire.
Wow.
Yeah.
So in a lot of cases, transparency may not be able to solve this. I mean, just because you know where something came from, it doesn't necessarily mean that it won't happen.
Correct. The transparency would help, but that is not. It's not the total answer. I think we need some fundamental changes in the way that we fund our elections.
So you guys have been doing a lot of exciting things. You did these town halls that were going on. And you had.
So yeah, we're doing democracy town halls. It's called the Democracy Town Hall Series. We are about to do our 8th one with Tom Steyer on December 21st, and we have a big one that I can't disclose just yet that will be happening. That will be happening shortly after that. And what we do with these, with our partner Equal Citizen, which is a national group that's based in Massachusetts, is we're pressuring the presidential candidates to talk about some of the solutions to things like the LLC loophole. So not just that money in politics is bad, but what are you going to do to fix these things? What are the specific things? So we have an hour with these democracy town halls to really nail them down on the details of those things. Another exciting thing we're doing in Open Democracy Action right now is our regional teams. So we call them regional democracy teams. We have them in 6 areas: Monadnock, Seacoast, Central New Hampshire, North Country, Upper Valley, and Southern New Hampshire. Southern New Hampshire covers Manchester and Nashua. And the first meeting for that is coming up next on the December 17th. And we're very excited for that. That meeting's going to be in Merrimack. Now, these are individuals just like you and me who are going to be working on these kinds of issues and interacting with their legislators in their backyard. You don't have to go across the state to go march or hold signs in the State House. You can do some of this stuff right in your own backyard. And that's kind of cool, where you can create relationships with your legislators and kind of let them know that you're watching and that you want to see some of these reforms passed.
And then you have a big event coming up with Granny D's birthday.
Yeah, there's 2 big events coming up in January. The first one, unfortunately, is the 10th anniversary of the Supreme Court Citizens United decision, which allowed this unlimited money coming into our election system. So we are having a funeral for democracy on the State House steps, complete with a coffin that we're going to parade downtown Concord. But more importantly, Granny D, who is the founder of our organization, and in the 1999 began walking across the United States to bring attention to all of these problems and the kind of the rot in our election system. She was 89 years old when she started. She walked 3,200 miles across the United States at 89 years old. She did cross-country skiing part of the way. Anyway, she managed to be able to get the McCain-Feingold campaign finance reform system passed. We're going to be celebrating her birthday with movies and speeches around the state, all run by these regional teams that I was just talking about.
So if people want to get a hold of you, what's the best way for them to do that if they want to help with this?
So particularly if you'd like to be part of the regional teams, go to opendemocracyaction.org, opendemocracyaction.org, and look for the Take Action button, and we'll give you some ideas of what you can do to help.
Well, I want to thank you for joining us and explaining that to us. I hope that helped you at home to understand something maybe you knew about this, maybe you didn't. And if you didn't, well, you do now. Thank you for watching. Take care. Bye.
When the public gets mobilized, almost anything can happen. Lincoln once said, with public sentiment, anything is possible. Without it, nothing is possible.
The preceding program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.